Hello, Annabelle. We're going to take a look at your 5 characteristics posting here. Go ahead and cue this up and let's take a look. So we're going to take a look at your posting overall, just get a look at whether things are organized the way that we have asked, that kind of thing. You've got very well described and notated, excellent. Intensity, you've got all the positions, number 3 and 6, 4 and 7, so on and so forth, very good. Temperature, awesome, very good. Now, it would have been good, even just for your notes, maybe you have them, if you would have had maybe what the color temperatures were for yourself. Hopefully you do have some of that info, just in case you have found solutions that you're very much interested in, that you want to repeat. That's going to be a good thing. Hardness, yep, you got it. Looks like you have everything here. So the next is kind of the exposures, looking at whether things are too light or too dark, or they're right in the middle, just right, and everything. It looks pretty good. Looks like your camera is handling things. So, exposure shouldn't have been very much of a challenge for everybody, because we did have these set on your program. So the camera should have been doing all of the work there. You were challenging it with some lighting problems, but other than that, it should have been able to render the images fairly well. The direction probably gave it the most problem, because you're only having one light. You can have a pretty extreme lights and darks in there, because they're dark objects, a light surface on the table, and you have one light source. So anyway, taking a look at this, it looks like you're pretty much doing what we want you to do. You've got elements that are engaging the picture plane. You've got elements toward the edges here. You're creating almost patterns here in the beginning, which is a very good sort of first strategy. You're starting to then get a little bit closer, working a little bit more with the lights and the darks and outlining the elements. This is called short lighting, when you have elements that are lit just basically along the edges, creating this sort of silhouette. You'll notice how emotive it tends to look when you have this kind of lighting going on. You have the light introduced a little bit right here, which can be a little bit of a problem, only because it's really distracting to have an element so bright right at the edge of the photo. So usually we want to kind of correct that. We don't want that quite in the photo there. If we take a step over and you don't see that light anymore, that's going to be where you want to be. You could still have that sort of residue of the light where it's sort of casting into the scene, but try not to have the light source itself in the image unless it's really about the light source, or you really have to have that light source to communicate what it is that you're trying to get at. Very good job of working with shadow patterns here. This is a very simple sort of experiment at first with the direction. You're just moving around the table. So you have so few objects or so few elements to work with here. Camera doesn't move. The light just is one light moving around the table. Even told you where to put the light each time. You're just now moving elements. This is a real good warm-up to get everybody in the sort of right mind frame to be thinking about photography in a way that is about shape and about pattern and about texture and tone, rather than objects. And that's where we want to be. Here you took a step forward, which is very good. Another step, and you're using outlines and silhouettes, and it's a very good way to go. Now, of course, you can improve things like, the focus. Your focus back here a little bit, so you can see that the background is in focus. This has a little bit to do with your depth of field, which we're exploring now with this next project. But if you would have focus more forward, manual focus on your camera and dial it in so your focus was somewhere right up front here on these elements, this would have been much softer, and you may not have even had the detail of these wrinkles in your shot, which are a little distracting if you think about it. Think about, like, when you see these photos, whether if it were a drawing, you would have included it, and if you wouldn't, would you have drawn like wrinkles over on the edge of your drawing? Probably not. You would have just ignored them if you saw them and not included them. So in photography, we have to actually actively get them out of there in one way or another, either coming in and cropping, or playing around with lighting, or playing around with the settings of our camera so that we can get things to look just the way that they need to look. Have a little bit of a focus thing here. If you are on manual focus, just remind yourself to refocus every single time. You can forget to do that if you're not accustomed to using manual focus all the time. Now, with two light sources, the key here is to really balance out the two lights. We have the main light source, which is the key light. We also have the fill light, which is really just a supplement. It's not meant to compete with the key. It's really just meant to sort of fill in some of the shadow areas. Now, on part of your image here in this, it's doing a pretty good job. It's sort of filling in right in here in this spot. That's excellent. That's what we want. Over here, because this object is being sort of smacked right in the side of the vase with the light, that is the fill light, what we're getting is equal amounts of brightness on either side of the vase, which is giving us what's called the butterfly effect. If you go to some of the other postings and take a look, you'll see it as well. If you go and listen to me talking on some of the other postings, you'll hear me talk about this because others have had this happen to others, but it's not a bad thing. It's an observation, but it's usually not something that we're looking to achieve unless we're going for something very specifically graphic. We would usually use it if we knew, for instance, we wanted to add type or something in the middle. So we light it in such a way so that text could go in that dark area in the middle. So we would use it more as a design element rather than a lighting element. So we typically want to avoid that. And you can do that by positioning the fill light in such a way where you're putting the fill light so it acts as a short lighting, like I was telling you, where you have the light that just barely hits the edge. Well, putting the fill light that way, it just barely hits the edge. You know you're never going to have that issue. Excellent use of shadow here and direction, very good. You've got a good instinct here. I think your simplicity is very good. Your kind of eye for arranging the design of the frame is very, very good. We have a few technical things that we'll work on to get you more comfortable with some of the controls and things, but overall, these compositions are fairly well seen. We get into the temperature, and this is where things tend to start to maybe get away from some students, where you start to think about the light, you start to think about the color, you're dialing in temperatures and things. Sometimes we forget about the arrangement on the table and the framing up on the image. We're so concerned about the lights and things. So you don't seem to have had that problem too much. You're still right in there. You're still using the bones and everything. What we're not seeing is that beautiful darkness and that beautiful kind of variation that you were getting before with the darker black and white image. You can see this is much more washed out or even in terms of the lighting. Suddenly everything's changed from this sort of really beautiful emotive quality with the light where you have shadows and shapes. Then what happens here is they become more descriptive. It's as if you went from making images of shapes, even though these are bottles and you see them as that, this becomes more about these are bones. And you can still treat them as shapes and things. So it's difficult. I threw this at everybody and kind of gave them this shift. This subject matter is more difficult to work with because of that, because they're very identifiable as a thing. And so that's always a challenge. The good thing is you didn't back away. You stayed nice and close. You stayed right in there and continued to work with them. Now, the lighting solutions, it looks like you're switching up some variety. I don't see a ton of exaggerated variety, but hopefully you shot plenty, and maybe you didn't choose some of them because you didn't like the blue ones or that type of thing. The main point of the temperature exercise was to get you familiar with all of those settings there. Now we move into the contrast, where we're using reflection. And reflection it's really about recycling the light. We use the one light source and then we grab the light and bounce it back in. And this is really much different than intensity because we're not adding that other light. And so what that does is it doesn't complicate things with competition. The the bounce card is never going to compete with the fill light, or the key light. So we don't have to worry about the butterfly effect or anything like that. It's always only going to be this beautiful supplement. It's also the best way to light very shiny objects, because what happens there is when you shine a direct light on something like silverware or glass or those kinds of things, you get very harsh specular highlights, very sort of small, very bright reflections that come back out the camera that are not pleasing at all. See, now we're going back to the beautiful sort of shape and kind of organization. It looks like maybe you didn't like the bones or something, because this is sort of more your speed, using the shape and using those. Now, we're not getting a whole lot of variation in some of these. It looks like from here to here to here, it's pretty much the same photograph, just slightly varied. Just so when you're doing these postings, try to look for a variety of photographs. They can have something similar to them. They're already going to, because it's the same shapes, the same objects. So see how you can vary them. This is just beautiful right in here. This is really what we're looking for. This kind of interaction. You've got dark, you've got shape with texture, you've got a shape here, another shape. This is really where it's starting to come together for you. And I can see here, this is that reflection we're talking about, but it's handled fairly well. It's not out of control for you. Again, it looks like you went from here, and it's pretty similar. This stuff is really beautiful here as well. When you're looking through your lens, kind of ask yourself, what is it that I'm really looking at? What is it that I'm really focusing on? I would guess that most of us kind of are, when we're looking through the camera, we're looking at the screen, we're really only looking at a small little portion of that screen, because we're really interested in that. When we find ourselves doing that, consider whether you need any of the other stuff. And if you don't, why am I including it in the photograph? Is there a way to not include it in the photograph? Can I get in there? Can I change this in some way so I'm only including the elements that are important to me that I'm looking at? That's a challenge. That's what we do as photographers. So then we're going to get into the last one, which is the hardness. And hardness is the shadows, really. Hardness is really all about this stuff right here on the edges here. Now, of course, it's diffusing the light, so it is going to affect other areas, but it's really going to affect how this line ends up looking, whether it's crisp or whether it is sort of feathered out and softened. And the more diffusion you use, the softer it ends up looking. We really start to use this when we do like figures, or we do something that's meant to have a very sort of organic feel to it. When we don't want that, when we want very sort of a graphic look and very sharp, we're not going to diffuse the key. We're going to keep it very hard, and we're going to use that crisp shadow to carve out the space a little bit more aggressively. It looks like you're really much more comfortable with these objects than the bones. The bones you put in there and then you kind of like just never went back to them. Maybe you just didn't like what the bones look like or something like that. So that's okay. You did your job in using them, and then you kind of went away from them. So that's fine. Here you have the light source kind of creeping in there just a little bit. And that's okay. I don't know that it's really contributing too much. What is here, and this is going to be really picky, but I want you to pay attention to it. Notice the horizon here. It's not quite straight. Now, it's just not straight enough to pose an issue, to not quite look right. It's like an instrument that's just sort of out of tune just a little bit. It either needs to be really not straight, so that deliberately, so that you can tell the audience knows you did that, or you got to have it straight, because then the audience is, they don't, they realize that that's the case. There are ways around this as well. There's always a counter to each of these things photographically, but for now, I would say either do it more aggressively or not at all when you have this. You probably weren't really aware of it, but it's just a really subtle thing. These images are very good, so I do want to kind of make sure that you're seeing some of these more detailed-oriented things so that you can continue to improve. Again, you've got the horizon here, and it's pretty set, but it's a little bit off. Just try. This one's a little better but just try to kind of keep things a little bit more even. Good job on putting it at the rule of thirds, though. I don't know if you did that deliberately, but you nailed it right there at the rule of thirds, because you have 2/3 here and then 1/3 here. That's always a good thing. Now, I mean, these two images, as we said before, they're pretty close to one another. They're kind of the same picture. Moving forward, I would just tell you, not to include two images that are this close to one another. They're just the same photograph, basically. Pick which one is the better one, include that one, and then choose something different, kind of thing. So I think overall you're pretty much on on level with what we're doing. Maybe you'll leave in a little bit above level. You got some sort of a natural instinct toward the shape and arrangement of the space and the composition. Clearly, those geometric shapes are much more attractive to you than the organic shapes of those bones. That's cool. You're starting to maybe realize some of the subject matter that you might want to be working with. Your handling of the light is excellent. Your handling of the topics that we're working with, the various sort of things, are very good. I'd say the bones, the temperature one, is probably the one that has the least amount of exploration. And again, that might have just been a bad day or an off day for you, or you just might not have really, grasped it, or didn't really care for the bones, or whatever it happened to be. But one of them, even the best projects out of the 5, one of them is going to be the one that isn't the best, even if it is really great. So anyway, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what you do coming up, and we'll see you in the studio. All right, bye-bye now.